The rain had stopped just moments before when Marina pushed open the crooked gate of the small farm she had inherited from her grandmother. Mud clung to her worn boots, and the smell of wet earth rose as if the earth itself breathed along with her. In her lap, wrapped in a cotton cloth that had once been white, slept Antonio, 3 months old, weighing more than she could silently carry. But she carried him. She always carried him. The house was little more than 4 wattle and daub walls, last whitewashed when her grandmother could still see. The roof had leaks whose sound Marina already knew. The kitchen gutter dripped into a blue bucket and went thump, thump, thump. The living room gutter dripped directly onto the packed earth floor and made a duller, sadder sound. In those first weeks, Marina learned to sleep between the 2 rhythms, rocking her son with her tired body while the rain conversed with the house. She was 23 years old, but had the eyes of someone who was already 40. The boy's father never got to hold his son in his arms. He said he was going to get cigarettes at a roadside gas station and never came back. His family pretended she never existed. Her family, too religious to understand and too proud to forgive, closed the door with the same politeness with which they opened it for Sunday visits. All that remained was the dead grandmother's farm, at the end of a dirt road that no one used anymore, and the promise, made in silence, that that boy would not go hungry as long as she had hands. The first few days were spent learning what she didn't know: how to light the wood stove without crying from the smoke, how to draw water from the well without the bucket hitting the rocks, how to recognize, by smell, that the milk she had saved had already gone sour. Antonio cried at night, and Marina softly sang songs that her grandmother used to sing to her, songs whose lyrics she didn't quite remember, but whose melody had remained stored somewhere deep in her heart, as if her body knew things that her memory had forgotten. She lost weight. Her clothes started to hang loosely on her shoulders. But she didn't complain, not even to herself. Complaining seemed like a waste of energy, and energy was the only thing she still had in stock. When her breast milk started to fail, she was terrified in a way she had never felt before. She looked at her son, too small, entirely dependent on her, and felt for the first time the real weight of being alone. Not the romantic loneliness of books, but the practical loneliness of someone who has no one to ask for a glass of water when their arm can no longer hold the child. It was on that day, in a late afternoon with an orange hue, that she heard the sound of little hooves on the road. Tack, tack, tack. At first she thought it was her imagination. Then she thought they were wild goats. But when she went out to look, she saw, coming around the bend in the road, a tall, thin man wearing a faded straw hat, leading 2 goats by a thin rope. In one hand he held a hoe, resting on his shoulder as if it were part of his body. He walked without haste, like someone who had been walking for a long time and had learned to conserve his steps. Marina stood frozen at the gate, gripping Antonio too tightly. The man stopped a short distance away, took off his hat, and simply said, "Good afternoon, miss. I'm looking for Mrs. Aparecida's house." Aparecida was her grandmother's name. Marina felt a lump in her throat and struggled to answer. "My grandmother died almost a year ago." The man was silent for a while. He slowly put his hat back on his head. He looked at the goats, looked at the ground, looked at Marina and the bundle she was carrying in her arms. "I worked for her many years ago. She gave me 2 goats when I was a kid to help me start my life. I used to bring her the kids. It was a promise I made." Marina didn't know what to say. He waited a while, as if he were used to waiting. "If you don't want to, I'll go back to the road." She looked at the goats. He looked at his son. He looked at the man, whose skin was tanned by the sun and whose eyes were a color she couldn't name, something between honey and wet earth. She thought of all the things she could lose by trusting a stranger, and she thought of all the things she had already lost by distrusting acquaintances. "You can come in," she said, and her voice came out firmer than she had expected. His name was Joaquim. He was in his early 30s, but the way he spoke made him seem older. He tied the goats to a guava tree in the yard, carefully leaned the hoe against the wall of the house, as one leans a respectable instrument, and asked if he could help with anything before leaving. Marina was going to say no, out of pride, but Antonio started crying from hunger at that very moment, and she felt her chest harden and become empty at the same time. The crying was the crying of someone who wasn't going to stop any time soon. Joaquim said nothing. He went to one of the goats, knelt on the ground, and silently began to milk it into a jug he took from his own bag. His hands were large and firm, and the milk came out white and warm. When the jug was full, he stood up, crossed the yard, and held it out to Marina without looking her in the eyes, as if he understood that looking would be an invasion. "Goat farming is better for young children than many people think," he said quietly. "That's how my mother raised me." Marina picked up the mug, her hand trembling. She warmed it a little more on the stove and fed it to her son with a small spoon. Antonio drank, choked a little, and fell asleep. It was the first time in weeks that he had slept without that thin, hunger-filled cry in the background of his sleep. Marina watched her sleeping son, and when she looked up, she saw that Joaquim had already picked up the hoe and was fixing a piece of the broken fence in the yard without being asked, without making a sound. She didn't ask him to stay. He didn't ask to stay. But as it began to get dark, he asked if he could sleep in the old barn just for that night, because the road was already dark. Marina said yes. That night, lying on the hard mattress in her grandmother's room, instead of the dripping water, she heard the distant sound of goats moving in the yard, and for some reason that sound made her cry. It wasn't a cry of sadness. It was one of those cries you let out when, after holding it in for a long time, your body finally understands that it can rest for a minute. Joachim stayed for a day, then 2, then a week. He didn't talk much. He woke up before sunrise, weeded the land, fixed what was broken, milked the goats, and returned to the kitchen to eat the little that Marina managed to prepare, always saying thank you, always washing his own plate. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't touch her. He didn't touch the boy without first asking with his eyes. When Antonio cried at night, Joachim stayed awake too, on the other side of the wall, and Marina knew because she heard him moving in the barn, ready to help if needed, without ever crossing the boundary she hadn't drawn but which he respected, as if it were a wall. On the 8th day, Marina asked, "Why did you stay?" Joachim took a while to answer. He was sitting on the doorstep, peeling an orange with his pocket knife. His hands moved with a calmness that seemed to come from another time. "Your grandmother fed me when I had no one," he said. "When I arrived here, I thought I would deliver the goats and leave. But then I saw you holding the boy, and I remembered my mother holding my siblings after my father left. I swore to myself back then that if I ever saw a woman alone like my mother was, I wouldn't walk past. I'm not here to collect anything from you. I'm here to repay a debt I made to myself." Marina remained silent. She looked at this man she didn't know, who appeared on the road like a figure from a dream, with 2 goats, a hoe, and an old promise. She wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Joachim seemed to understand, because he stood up, offered her half an orange, and went back to work without waiting for an answer. The days began to have a different rhythm. Marina noticed that she smiled from time to time and was startled by her own smile, like someone who finds an object that had been given up for lost. Joachim taught her how to recognize which herbs in the woods were good for tea and which were for pain. He taught her how to make a fence for the chickens he brought the following week, after going to the neighboring town to sell some eggs. He taught her how to milk the goats with her own hands, and Marina, who had never touched a large animal in her life, discovered that she had a knack for it, and that the goats liked her in a calm and curious way. Antonio began to gain weight. His cheeks took on that ripe fruit color that healthy children have. He began to laugh, first with that startled laugh of babies discovering their own laughter, and then with that more relaxed, delightful, contagious laugh. Whenever Joachim heard the boy's laughter, he would stop what he was doing for a second, close his eyes, and take a deep breath, as if that sound were a precious thing he was saving for some dark night in the future. Marina still didn't fully trust him. She had learned to distrust things that were too good, because good things in her life had always had a price to pay later. But Joachim didn't demand anything. He didn't ask. He didn't insinuate. He slept in the barn, ate what she cooked, was grateful, worked, and when he held the boy in his arms, it was with the care of someone holding something they know to be fragile. Marina began to notice that he spoke to Antonio in a low voice, telling stories that she only caught in fragments. Stories of oxen that knew the way home, of trees that bore fruit in the wrong months, of a mother who sang to sleep even when she was tired. One night, she asked about his mother. Joachim stared at the fire in the wood-burning stove for a while before answering. "She died when I was 14. She worked too hard. Her heart gave out too soon." He paused. "I promised her I'd be a man who doesn't disappear, who doesn't vanish when things get tough. I couldn't save her. But I'm trying to keep the other part of the promise." Marina felt her eyes burning. She didn't cry in front of him because she still had her old pride as armor. But that night, lying in the dark, she thought of the man who promised to get cigarettes and didn't return, of the father who closed her door, of the relatives who disappeared, and she thought of Joachim, sleeping in the barn so as not to invade her space, milking goats to feed a child that wasn't even his. She thought about how much life had taught her to expect little, and how that little she expected had never been enough, even then. She thought that perhaps there were different men in the world, and that perhaps she had become accustomed to looking in the wrong direction. Winter arrived. The nights grew cold, and the wind seeped through the cracks in the old house. Joachim, without saying a word, spent 3 days repairing the walls, patching the holes with mud and straw, caulking the roof with a skill Marina had never seen. When he finished, the house was transformed. It was still humble, still small, but it was a place where a child could grow up without shivering from the cold. Marina invited him to sleep inside, in the back room that had been his grandmother's storage room. He silently accepted, silently thanked her, and silently slept. Another day, he got up before sunrise as usual and went to milk the goats as if nothing had changed. But something had changed, and they both knew it. It was on a June morning that what had to happen, happened. Antonio was crawling across the kitchen floor chasing a chicken that had wandered in uninvited. Marina was laughing. Joachim had just arrived from the yard with a basket of cassava. Their eyes met above the boy's head and lingered there a second longer than necessary. Marina felt her face grow hot. Joachim lowered his gaze, but not too quickly. He put the basket down and said, in his lowest voice, "Marina, I didn't come here looking for this. I swear on my mother's memory that I didn't. But I think you need to know that if one day I have to leave because you asked me to, I will. And if I never have to leave, I'll stay too. But what I feel won't change one way or another." Marina didn't answer right away. She picked Antonio up from the ground, hugged her son, and stared at the man who had appeared on the road with 2 goats and a hoe and had, without noise, without haste, without asking for anything, rebuilt piece by piece a life she thought she would have to live alone. She thought about how the word love had been sullied in the mouths of so many people who had said it to her but never meant it. She thought about how Joachim hadn't said the word and how she had understood, even so, what he was saying. "Don't go," she said, just like that. "Please, don't go." He shook his head only once. He didn't come near. He didn't touch her. He just went back to the yard to continue his work for the day. But Marina saw, from behind him, that he was wiping his face with his shirt sleeve, and she understood that men who have learned not to cry differently. They cry in secret. They cry while working. It took months for him to muster the courage to hold her hand. It took almost a year until the first time they slept in the same bed. And even then it was only to sleep, because respect had become a language they both spoke fluently, and neither of them was in a hurry to change languages. Antonio began calling Joachim Dad without anyone teaching him. The first time, Marina stood paralyzed in the kitchen, waiting to see how Joachim would react. He knelt in front of the boy, held his 2 little hands, and said in a choked voice she had never heard before, "Yes, you can call me, my son. You can call me." Their life never became luxurious. The goats grew into a small flock. The vegetable garden yielded enough fruit for them to eat and to sell at the town market on Saturdays. Joachim built, with his own hands, another room in the house, then another, then a covered clothesline, so Marina wouldn't get wet when she hung out laundry. She learned to make cheese with the goat's milk, cheese that became famous in the region, and people came from far away just to buy it. The money that came in was little, but it was constant, and it was honest, and it was theirs. Antonio grew up, and he grew up knowing that he had a father who had chosen to be his father, something few children in the world can say. He grew up knowing how to work the land, knowing how to respect animals, knowing how to sing the old songs his great-grandmother used to sing and that his mother now sang again with a firmer voice. He grew up seeing his parents look at each other in the kitchen the way people look at each other when they've learned, the hard way. That true love is a silent thing built brick by brick, day after day, without grand promises, without pretty words, just with presence. Many years later, when Marina already had gray hair at her temples and Joachim's hands were even calloused from work, someone asked her at the market what the secret to a good life was. She thought for a while, looked at Joachim, who was on the other side of the stall talking to a customer, and answered softly, almost to herself, "I thought I was going to raise my son alone in the woods." And then a man appeared on the road with 2 goats and a hoe. It was nothing more than that. And at the same time, it was everything. She smiled into the void, in the way of someone thanking someone invisible. Deep down, Joachim felt her gaze even without seeing it, as he always did. And he raised his head, and the 2 looked at each other above the movement of the fair, as if they were still those 2 strangers from many years ago at the gate of a forgotten farm, discovering for the first time that there are people in the world who arrive without asking for anything, and stay and change everything, just by staying. And the afternoon fell upon them slowly, the way it falls upon those who have somewhere to return to.